Now it's recording, see?
Oh, yeah.
All right, you ready?
Yes.
Why are we recording? Because I'm gone this afternoon and my other classes are going to get to see this recorded lecture of my very bright class.
Are you taking care of your kid?
Obviously.
No, my mom's home taking care of my sick son. But anyway, ready? So we left off at Antietam. And again, let's note that Antietam is one of the two battles fought in the North. So maybe that'll trip you up. Antietam is in Maryland, right? It's fought in the North. If I had a fill in the blanker saying these are the two battles fought in Union territory, you would say Antietam and Gettysburg. Good. So Antietam, it's a turning point in the sense that it prevents foreign intervention. Remember how Lee's getting a little bit desperate. He needs the help of Europe, specifically Britain and France. He's thinking if he gets the victory at Antietam, then they'll pour in a bunch of support. They'll give more boats, they'll give more money, they'll give whatever. But they lose at Antietam, they're forced to retreat, and now Lincoln has the momentum to issue what? The Emancipation Proclamation. And when he issues the Emancipation Proclamation, it frees all the slaves, right? No. It frees the slaves in the Confederacy. So think about that. That's like issuing a law for a different country. The Confederacy doesn't say, oh, wow, hey, Lincoln just freed the slaves. Okay. The Confederacy obviously keeps slavery, but it will change the course of the war. As the Union does start to dig into the South and they occupy that territory, the slaves will essentially be free. Yes, Jake Johnson.
Why did Oregon and California take the side of the Union when they're completely separated from everyone?
All right, so the Republican Party in 1860 broadens their platform basically, and one of the big things that make these guys support the Republicans is the fact that they want a transcontinental railroad, which they passed in 1862, and they continue their support as a result. So think how a transcontinental railroad is going to impact these guys significantly. They're now connected to the market system, the economy, their gold goes over there, you go over there and whatnot. But anyway, the EP doesn't really change too much immediately, but it will kind of morally change the war. So think about this. It, if you want the wording of it, frees slaves in all areas of active rebellion. Does it free slaves in the border states? No, the border states stay with the Union, so those slaves are essentially still enslaved. Why don't you give yourself a quick note here as well of what formally frees all of the slaves? The 13th Amendment. That is one of the amendments that you just cannot forget. So the 13th Amendment will be passed about 1865 or so. The South will slowly ratify it. But when the 13th Amendment is passed, that is what officially ends slavery. This does not. It again, only slaves in areas of active rebellion. All black units begin to fight for the Union. I probably will ask you to remember the number of the regiment from Massachusetts that is the first all-black regiment. They make the movie Glory about this all-black regiment. The 54th. Good, that was a term, right? The Fighting 54th, the famous 54th. The movie Glory is based on them. If you're in my movie club, we're starting that tomorrow, by the way. So you see the recruiting. Frederick Douglass was a big part of the recruiting. If you want some numbers down, there were no black troops in the Union Army prior to 1863, but after, about 10%, which is significant. And I would say that just furthers the advantage of the North with all of their numbers. Because not only do they now have black troops, who else is still pouring into the country exclusively in the North? And what's happened to the Southern population? Going down. So population, we got to remember, is a major, major advantage of the Union. Now, what happens if the black troops are captured?
Slavery.
They're either enslaved or they're outright massacred. And that's what happens at the notorious Fort Pillow Massacre. This was a battle where black troops were fighting with white officers. They were actually overrun by the Confederates, and they tried to surrender by flying white flags. They weren't allowed to surrender. They were outright killed. And I would probably note the name of the Confederate general that ordered that. You may actually know what he's famous for. The Confederate general who takes part of this horrible massacre, his name is Nathan Bedford Forrest. Nathan Bedford Forrest.
He's not Bedford.
B. Nathan Bedford Forrest. What would he be famous for?
Burned down a forest.
Here's my hint. Have you seen Forrest Gump?
Yeah.
In the beginning of Forrest Gump, he kind of goes through his lineage and he's like, I don't know why they named me Forrest. It was because this funny guy wore white sheets.
KKK.
Nathan Bedford Forrest is the founder of the Klan. So his roots are clear. He takes part of this massacre. Later, after the Civil War, Nathan Bedford Forrest is known as the founder of the Klan. He then goes off terrorizing for, several years. But yes, the movie Forrest Gump, he says that he's named after Nathan Bedford Forrest. Anyway, there's the Fighting 54th, the famous 54th. I don't really have any names for you to log in, in association with this. But I would note something about the movie Glory. If you're in my movie club, we're starting this one tomorrow. Again, quick note on that. I know a handful of you do watch the movies. We just finished Amistad. This one is still rated R, so you do need your permission slip. But it's going to be in my wife's room. So I'm not here tomorrow, but if you are watching this one, just, she's got the list. If you're there, go to my wife's room. You'll start it. I'll analyze it. It's good. Wins 3 Academy Awards. You got Matthew Broderick, Denzel Washington, Morgan Freeman. Good movie. If you haven't seen it, I think you would like it. So, Glory. What else do we have? A number of battles that African Americans do take part in. The movie will highlight at first the Union was reluctant, but later they do play a significant role in a whole lot of the battles throughout the South. Don't stress this slide. Just kind of get the overall story with this slide. As we're going through the progress of the Civil War, and again, look how many battles we are skipping over. You can take an entire course in college just on the battles of the Civil War. So we're just trying to get the overall story here with maybe a couple of the battles. And let's kind of note, as time is going on, the Confederacy is winning. Lee is outnumbered, yet his tactics are superior. So even though he's outnumbered, he's able to achieve several notable victories. Big victory at Fredericksburg. Wow, 12,000 Union casualties. That's where Ambrose Burnside gets dismissed and replaced by Joseph Hooker. Again, Lee is outnumbered, but he's able to get a victory. But we call this victory at Chancellorsville a Pyrrhic victory. I'd write down that term if I were you, especially if you don't know the term Pyrrhic. Have you ever heard it?
No.
Miss Fleece, Miss Mercer teach you a Pyrrhic victory?
No.
No way.
No.
A Pyrrhic victory is a win, but it's really a loss.
And you lose so many troops.
Because you lose so many troops. Jake, very good. So a Pyrrhic victory, you get the win, but you lost so many troops, or in this case, check out what the Confederacy lost. Stonewall Jackson. Stonewall Jackson was Lee's right-hand man. He was a force to be reckoned with, but he was killed accidentally through friendly fire. And when Stonewall Jackson died, along with a number of other Confederate troops, Lee feels a little bit desperate. So he just took a big loss in losing Jackson, a big loss in losing all of these troops. Due to that desperation, he needs a big win. To get that big win, he's got to invade the North. He's hoping with a victory in the North, Europe will again come in with aid for the Confederacy. So look at it on a map. He gets the victory at Fredericksburg, victory at Chancellorsville. Now he wants to shoot into the North. He's hoping for the victory, but that does not happen. So this, by the way, is the furthest point north the South ever gets. What's the futile charge through the open field? What was that called again? The furthest point north, the high water mark? Pickett's charge. That's the highest point north the South ever gets. This, by the way, is the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. I hope that doesn't mess with you if I have an evil fill-in-the-blank question tomorrow. I could ask you, what was the bloodiest day of the Civil War? And you would say Antietam. This is the bloodiest battle. More troops die at Gettysburg. Get this. More troops die at Gettysburg than everyone that died in the Revolution, the War of 1812, and the Spanish-American War combined. We're talking 50,000. at the Battle of Gettysburg. So that is major if you look at the numbers. So wow, 23,000 from the Union, 28,000 from the Confederacy, that is significant. When we look at the overall death toll, the Civil War is off the charts. In terms of the turning point in the West, this is Grant's big victory. And again, Grant had been winning and winning and winning throughout the South and the West. This one gets the Union control of the Mississippi River, putting that Anaconda Plan into effect. They do slowly strangle the South into submission by cutting off those western states. So think about the Mississippi, you got Arkansas, you got Texas, you got Louisiana on the other side. How are they going to get support now?
Well, they just pitch it out Mississippi River.
Well, now that the Union has control of the Mississippi, they're cut off. And I'll show you the map on the next slide. You'll see how the South is being carved into pieces by the Union. So it is cutting them off. It is an effective strategy. It's just taken time. Meanwhile, Lincoln delivers his famed Gettysburg Address. This, of course, was well planned, right? Everyone knew that Lincoln was going to be speaking. You see the picture of Lincoln speaking?
Barely.
Yeah, and that's the thing, barely. He was not the keynote speaker. He was there to deliver an introduction for another guy who's going to speak for like an hour. Lincoln's words, however, are so well remembered, I guarantee you guys can quote Lincoln's Gettysburg Address.
That's all I got.
7 years ago, our fathers
brought forth
brought forth.
a new nation.
Look at that. See, you guys remember that. And this was only like 2 paragraphs, 5 minutes of reading before a keynote speaker, but it is so important. Look what he's saying. He's bringing us back to our roots. 40, you know what a score is? 20 years. So 80 plus 7, what was 87 years prior? The Revolution, 1776. So 87 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation conceived in liberty, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Look what he's doing. He just changed the entire scope of the war. This is now a war for equality. So this is major because you remember what Lincoln said at the beginning of the war? If I could save the Union by freeing all the slaves, I would. If I could free it by, if I could end the Civil War by freeing no slaves, I would. So now he's clearly saying that all men are created equal. This is a major speech that you guys even remember from, I don't know, 8th grade, 5th grade, whatever grade they taught it to you in. So anyway, the Gettysburg Address. Here's the scope of the war. And just kind of look at how things are progressing over time. They do push south slowly, 1861, dipping into the border states. 1862, they got New Orleans. 1863, a whole lot of progress because of Vicksburg. 1864, who is the guy that is tearing this path of destruction to the sea?
Is it William?
It's William Tecumseh Sherman. William Sherman. William Sherman. This is going to get nasty, by the way, in his path of destruction to the sea. William Tecumseh Sherman is implementing something called total war. He is basically ordered to destroy the Southern will to fight. He will burn down the South, order everyone to evacuate. It doesn't matter if you are old, a woman, a child. If you can't walk, you're going to be you're going to be part of this path of destruction. So he's doing it on purpose to destroy the Southern will to fight. There he is, by the way. And you can kind of see his path. They burned down Atlanta. So Atlanta, I've got a bunch of pictures of that following up here, but Atlanta is burned down. Sherman then gets to Savannah and continues his path of destruction through the Carolinas. Now the interesting thing is, as he's tearing this path of destruction, what happens to all the old plantations, or specifically the slaves that are on the plantations? No, they're kind of freed, but their status is in limbo. So the slaves don't really know what to do, so they're following Sherman and all of his men on this path of destruction. So he ends up with like tens of thousands of slaves / former slaves who don't know their status, and he issues one of the more monumental orders ever. Have you ever heard of 40 acres and a mule? That saying, 40 acres and a mule? That's his plan. So his plan to deal with all of those contraband slaves, as they're called, is to carve up the old plantations and to give every former slave 40 acres and a mule. He carved up 400,000 acres. A bunch of former slaves are then given 40 acres and a mule. But guess what? It's later taken away. It's taken away by President Johnson during Reconstruction. Johnson ends up giving all that land back to the former plantation owners. So the whole thing of 40 acres and a mule, it's known as a broken promise. You, again, have heard of that today. I believe there's like a production company called something like 40 Acres and a Mule, if you know who Spike Lee is. Maybe. But anyway, that's out there. That's why you may have heard of it, but that's his plan. It's later overturned by the president. Just a few quick pictures of Atlanta. That's a drawing. That's an actual picture of it. So they're basically burning it to the ground. Total war implemented. Meanwhile, this is crazy. Meanwhile, there's an election. The Constitution must prevail. The Constitution dictates every 4 years there is a presidential election, so sure enough, it's Lincoln versus McClellan again, right? McClellan, the general who was dismissed 2 times. McClellan, the case of the slows guy, is now going to lead the Northern Democrats against Lincoln. Lincoln, by the way, it's not technically a Republican Lincoln in 1864. They changed their name to the Union Party, and he brings in someone from Tennessee. I do think you should note his vice president, Andrew Johnson, from Tennessee. Wait, isn't Tennessee in the South? Didn't Tennessee secede? Yes. He brings in a friendly from Tennessee. Andrew Johnson was not part of the secessionists from Tennessee, so Lincoln brought him in to secure the border states. It turned out that Johnson was a really bad racist and an awful president. So yeah, ends up being bad. Couple quick side notes about 1864. I do think you need something on the Copperheads. So the Copperheads are the extreme wing of the Democratic Party, almost terrorist-like, advocating violence against Lincoln. So the Copperheads are behind all sorts of anti-Lincoln propaganda. They're led by this interesting named guy, Clement Vallandigham, who, by the way, has a fascinating death. Should I go on a tangent and tell you how the guy dies? So later he's a lawyer, and he's trying to show how his client couldn't have shot someone. In fact, he accidentally shoots himself, and he's trying to argue in front of a court that, oh no, my client couldn't have shot this person. He ends up trying to demonstrate how his client would have done it by taking a loaded gun in court. Goes, see, he went like this, and then he accidentally shot himself and died by trying to demonstrate how his client couldn't have done something. So yeah, he accidentally killed himself by trying to demonstrate how his client would have done something. So anyway, interesting death for Mr. Vallandigham. That's some of the propaganda out there. The Copperheads, they would make stuff up, basically trying to appeal to the racists, trying to suggest, ooh, Abraham Africanus, his secret life.
Was Wilkes Booth is crazy?
Yes.
Was he part of it?
No, but John Wilkes Booth would definitely be motivated. He was a Southerner. More on him in 1 second. I'm almost to John Wilkes Booth. We got to get to the end of the war first. Copperheads, made fun of. Who's the South vote for? The South can't vote. The South secedes. The South is not part of the election of 1864, so they're not able to vote.
Man, McClellan did real well in this one.
Yeah, McClellan, you can see, 1.8 million votes. Electoral votes, not so much, but 1.8 million, 45%. Lincoln, 55%.
Since the Civil War was 4 or 5 years, did the Confederacy have another election?
Did the Confederacy? No. I don't know everything about it, but Jefferson Davis is there throughout the entire thing with the vice president, whose name I said you need to remember. But it's those two throughout the entire Civil War. Do you remember the VP, whose name I said is important because he comes back later as a super racist? Alexander Stevens. Alexander
He
Stevens.
looks like Freddy Krueger. That's the one.
Yes, the guy that looks like Freddy Krueger. Anyway, the final Virginia campaign is the plot to get Lee and to get Richmond. But this is a very tedious, bloody, difficult task. And basically the Confederacy is entrenched around Richmond, and Grant's strategy is to just constantly engage them. By constantly engaging them, we're talking casualty rates are through the roof. You can see it does take quite a bit of time, but eventually he's able to force Lee to surrender. Sometimes it's trivial, but you need to know where Lee surrenders. I think that you know where Lee surrenders. Appomattox Courthouse, vaguely recall that from 8th grade, from life, from whatever.
Yeah.
So Lee surrenders, Appomattox Courthouse, there it is, April 9th, 1865. And yes, the timing of this is relatively important. So in April 9th of 1865, Lee surrenders, but the war is technically not over. In fact, Joseph Johnson, another Confederate general, is still out in the field fighting, and that's where the John Wilkes Booth story comes in. John Wilkes Booth knows that the Confederacy is on the ropes, but they know they still have troops in the field. So John Wilkes Booth has this plan to just throw the Union into outright chaos. He wants to kill the president, kill Grant, kill Johnson, and kill the Secretary of State, William Seward. He wants to just totally throw it in an absolute mess to maybe continue the war, to give Joseph Johnson some more time for whatever to happen. So he's got this master plan, and there are a bunch of other co-conspirators who are going to try to attack Lincoln, Grant, Johnson, Seward, all at the exact same time. More on that in 1 second, but that's John Wilkes Booth's plan. Just take a look at a few of these numbers, by the way. You can see the casualty rates. And by the way, the historians continue to increase the numbers of those dying from disease and dying from wounds, like even today. They're researching further and further into this, saying that maybe up to 1 million died from these two alone. Look at that. So the Civil War, again, if you include disease and like wounded, you're well over 1 million.
Only 4,000 people died in the Revolutionary War.
Yeah. Crazy to think of, huh? So 4,000, 620,000, over 1 million, depending on what you're looking at. Okay, so the John Wilkes Booth thing. He knew that Lincoln was going to be at this play, and the plan actually was for Lincoln to be assisted with like Grant and Grant's wife. Last second, Grant's wife didn't want to go. So they end up like canceling. They took a train elsewhere the last second. So Lincoln, his wife, his son's there, and a few others, and you know the story. But how in the world is John Wilkes Booth like knowledgeable about Ford's theater? How in the world is he able to get like up to the suite?
Because he's not an actor.
Not just an actor, a famous actor who had been in that theater, whose family is famous, who owns a theater. So John Wilkes Booth was a like really, really well-known guy, and his plan is to take out Lincoln. And at the exact same time, the plan was for the other guys to kill Johnson and Seward. The whole Grant thing fell through the roof. What happens to the vice president? What happens to the Secretary of State? Are they killed?
Secretary of State, he had like a neck brace.
Secretary of State got stabbed.
Yeah.
So a guy actually shows up at William Seward's hotel room, stabs him, and he was bedridden for several months, but he did make a comeback. As for Andrew Johnson, the guy who was tasked with killing him chickened out. They said that he may have showed up at his hotel room, but then backed out and never did it. We know what John Wilkes Booth does, right? So there he is. He gets to the suite. He shoots Lincoln in the back of the head. He then jumps down the balcony, and he, remember, shouts that phrase in Latin, Sic Semper Tyrannis.
Doesn't he break his leg?
He does break his leg, and then he somehow is able to escape, and they say that this guy almost was able to catch John Wilkes Booth, but then like he was stabbed in the stomach, and John Wilkes Booth is on the run. So he had his escape route planned, and he had a bunch of help along the way. You can see his escape route from Ford's Theater. He goes here, the home of Dr. Mudd. Any National Treasure fans know the origins of like Dr. Mudd? A National Treasure fan?
Yeah.
His name is Mudd, stems from that. I don't know. Many years ago, it seemed like every student had seen National Treasure. I guess the whole Nick Cage thing, he's not as popular as he used to be. Anyway, John Wilkes Booth is on the run. Eventually, he is surrounded. He refuses to give up. He is killed when he's surrounded, but there were a bunch of other co-conspirators who end up being put on trial and ultimately executed. Check this out with one of the co-conspirators. Anything look, I don't know, different about the people who were hanged? One's a woman. That's the first woman ever executed by the government, by the United States. So she was one of the co-conspirators. Anyway, as it's done,
Why'd we get rid of him?
not too much to note with this one, other than the fact it's really weird. I don't know, most of you have been exposed to this at some point where they've given you those odd comparisons between Lincoln's death and Kennedy's death.
Oh, yeah, this one.
Like,
John Wilkes Booth did both of them.
no, but like John Wilkes Booth is known by all three of his names. Lee Harvey Oswald is also known by all three names. And ooh, both have 15 letters. Let me take you through a couple of these things. I can't read it from up there. So, again, nothing to write down from this. It's just weird, but look. Both presidents were elected to the House of Representatives in '46. Both presidents were non-Masons. Both of their successors were Masons. Ooh. Both were losing candidates for their party's vice presidential nomination in '56. Both presidents were elected in '60. Both died after being shot in the head. Both their predecessors were the last presidents to be born of their respective centuries. Both their predecessors left office in their 70s and retired to Pennsylvania. Ooh. Both their vice presidents and successors were Southern Democrats named Johnson. Yeah, that one's kind of weird. Let's see, what else? Both presidents were known for their wit and eloquence. Sure. Hold on, look, this thing continues.
They were both born in Nowhere.
Both presidents had been captains of ships in their private lives, Lincoln on a riverboat, Kennedy on PT 109. Each president suffered from a genetic disease. Both presidents shot in the head on a Friday, seated beside their wives. Both Fridays preceded a major holiday observed within the week. Ooh, weird.
What about on the same day?
Look at this one. Both assassinations occurred in a city that was the 14th largest in the nation according to the most recent census taken in '60. Weird. Both presidents were accompanied by another couple. The male companion of the other couple was wounded by the assassin. Both presidents fathered 4 children and a son died during the presidency. Both presidents' last names have 7 letters. Both assassins' full names have 15 letters. This one. You ever see this one? After shooting Lincoln, Booth ran from a theater to a warehouse. After shooting Kennedy, Oswald ran from a warehouse to a theater. Both assassins shot and killed with a Colt. Both assassins died in the same month of their victim in a state adjacent to the state of their birth. And they get kind of weird with this. Both assassins were Southern white males born in their late 30s who were in their mid-20s, were 5'8" in height with hazel eyes and brown hair. Anyway, there's more of these. I'll leave it up there. I'll upload it. Have I been to the JFK Museum? No. I've been to Ford Theater. We good? We done?
Bye.